Imagine standing inside an ancient Egyptian tomb, a tomb that has been sealed for more than 3,000 years. The air is hot, the passage is dark, and behind a wall lies the burial chamber of a young pharaoh whose name had almost disappeared from history. Then, you make a tiny opening in the wall, you raise a candle, and suddenly, gold begins to shine through the darkness, golden statues, jewelry, ancient furniture, chariots, and objects that have been untouched for thousands of years. This was not a scene from a horror movie. It actually happened in Egypt in 1922. British archaeologist Howard Carter had discovered the tomb of Tutankhamun, the boy pharaoh who would become one of the most famous rulers in history. But something else happened after the discovery. People began connecting a series of strange deaths and misfortunes to the tomb. Newspapers began talking about a terrible ancient curse, a curse that supposedly killed anyone who disturbed the resting place of the pharaoh. But was Tutankhamun really protecting his tomb from beyond the grave? Tutankhamun became pharaoh while still a child. He was probably around 8 or 9 years old when he came to the throne. He would rule Egypt for less than a decade, before dying at roughly 19. His reign was not originally considered one of the greatest in Egyptian history. In fact, Tutankhamun might have remained a relatively obscure figure, if not for what happened after his death. Before Tutankhamun became king, Egypt had experienced enormous religious and political changes. His predecessor, Akhenaten, had promoted the worship of the god Aten and dramatically changed traditional Egyptian religious life. Tutankhamun later restored the traditional religious order. His original name was Tutankhaten. Later it was changed to Tutankhamun. After his death, later rulers attempted to erase much of the memory of the controversial Amarna period from official history. And because of this, Tutankhamun was never remembered like the great warrior kings of Egypt. He was not famous because of enormous military victories. He was not famous because he ruled for decades. He became famous for something completely different, his tomb. And remarkably, that tomb survived for thousands of years. By the early 20th century, archaeologists had already discovered many royal tombs in Egypt's Valley of the Kings, but Howard Carter believed something was still missing. He believed the tomb of Tutankhamun was somewhere beneath the desert. The problem was, almost nobody believed him anymore. Carter had spent years searching. He and his Egyptian workers moved enormous quantities of sand and rubble beneath the brutal Egyptian sun. But the results were disappointing. Nothing. Year after year, the search continued. And Lord Carnarvon, the wealthy man financing Carter's expedition, was becoming convinced that the valley had already been exhausted. By 1922, Carter was running out of chances. Carnarvon agreed to finance one final season. Then, on November 4th, 1922, everything changed. One of Carter's workers discovered the top of a buried staircase. The team began clearing the sand and rubble, step by step. The staircase slowly appeared, then came a doorway, and on the doorway were ancient seals. Carter realized that he might finally have found something extraordinary, a royal tomb. He immediately sent an urgent message to Lord Carnarvon in England. After years of searching, he had finally found it. But the real mystery was only beginning. Lord Carnarvon rushed to Egypt. The staircase was cleared. The sealed doorway was exposed. But there was something strange. Evidence suggested that ancient robbers had entered the tomb long ago, and that the entrance had later been sealed again. Still, the discovery was extraordinary. Carter carefully made a small opening in the doorway. Then he inserted a candle. He leaned forward and looked inside. At first, there was only darkness. Then the candlelight revealed something unbelievable. Gold everywhere. Golden objects, statues, furniture, chariots, strange animal figures, treasures scattered throughout the chamber. Lord Carnarvon reportedly asked Carter, "Can you see anything?" And Carter answered, "Yes, wonderful things." Those words would become legendary. The world had discovered King Tut. but the greatest treasure had not yet been revealed. In February 1923, Carter opened the burial chamber. Inside was something astonishing, a huge gilded shrine, and inside that shrine were more shrines. Then came a stone sarcophagus. Inside it were nested coffins, and at the center, the mummy of Tutankhamun. The innermost coffin was made of solid gold, and covering the young king's mummy was the now famous golden funerary mask. The world had discovered one of the greatest archaeological treasures ever found. One of the most important people connected to the discovery was Lord Carnarvon. He had financed Howard Carter's excavation for years. Without his support, the search for Tutankhamun's tomb might never have continued, but only a few months after the tomb was opened, Carnarvon became seriously ill. He had suffered a mosquito bite. The bite became infected. His condition deteriorated rapidly. On April 5, 1923, Lord Carnarvon died. He was 56 years old. That death was enough to ignite a worldwide sensation. Newspapers immediately began connecting his death to Tutankhamun's tomb, and then the story became darker. Some people claimed that the pharaoh had punished Carnarvon for disturbing his ancient resting place. The famous writer Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes, even supported supernatural explanations surrounding Carnarvon's death. Suddenly, an archaeological discovery had transformed into a horror story. The newspapers had everything they needed: an ancient king, a sealed tomb, a mysterious death, and supposedly a curse. But there was one enormous problem. There was no curse inscription inside Tutankhamun's tomb, threatening death to anyone who entered. The famous curse was largely a legend created and amplified after the discovery. Yet by then, the legend was already too powerful to stop. As the years passed, more deaths became associated with Tutankhamun's tomb. People began counting everyone connected with the excavation who died after the discovery. The list seemed frightening, but there was a major problem with the story. Death is inevitable. If dozens of people are involved in an archaeological expedition, some of them will eventually die. The real question is, did the people connected to Tutankhamun's tomb die at an unusually high rate? The evidence does not strongly support that idea. According to historical accounts, only a small number of the people present when the tomb was opened died during the following years. And perhaps the strongest argument against the curse was Howard Carter himself. He was the man who spent years searching for the tomb. He was one of the people who spent the most time inside it, and yet he survived for many years after the discovery. Howard Carter died in 1939, nearly 2 decades after Tutankhamun's tomb was opened. So if the curse was real, why did the man who disturbed the tomb more than almost anyone else survive for so long? And there was another important detail. Lord Carnarvon's death had a known medical explanation. His infected mosquito bite led to severe illness. That sounds much less mysterious than an ancient supernatural curse, but people still wondered, could something inside the tomb have caused his death? For thousands of years, Egyptian tombs could contain food, organic materials, dead bodies, and other substances. Some scientists have therefore considered whether microorganisms, mold, or other contaminants could survive inside sealed tombs. Ancient mummies have been found with molds and microorganisms. So could someone entering a sealed tomb have inhaled something dangerous? It sounds like the perfect scientific explanation for a mummy's curse. Instead of magic, perhaps the tomb contained something deadly. But there is a problem. There is no convincing evidence that Tutankhamun's tomb contained a special deadly organism capable of selectively killing the people who entered it. And there is another important point. People in Egypt during the 1920s were exposed to many ordinary diseases and infections, so the environment outside the tomb could itself be dangerous. In the end, science does not turn Tutankhamun's curse into a biological weapon. Instead, the evidence points towards something much more ordinary: disease, chance, and sensational journalism. But there was still another mystery, one that was far more important than the supposed curse. How did Tutankhamun actually die? How did Tutankhamun actually die? He was extremely young, only around 19 years old. Scientists have investigated his mummy using modern technology. Over the years, researchers have proposed many possibilities: murder, disease, malaria, and injuries from an accident. One important finding is that Tutankhamun suffered from serious health problems. Evidence suggests that he had malaria and a severe leg injury. Some researchers have proposed that these conditions may have contributed to his death. His burial also appears to have happened relatively quickly. Some of the objects placed in his tomb may originally have been intended for other people. This suggests something important. The young king's death may have been sudden and unexpected. Imagine that. A teenage pharaoh, who was supposed to continue ruling Egypt, suddenly dies. His servants have to prepare his burial. His tomb has to be completed. His body has to be prepared for eternity. And then, the tomb is sealed. The world forgets him for more than 3,000 years, until Howard Carter arrives. So perhaps the greatest mystery is not, did Tutankhamun curse his tomb? It is, what happened to a teenage king that caused him to die so young? And even today, we still don't have every answer. The curse of Tutankhamun may not have been supernatural, but something about the story is undeniably fascinating. A young king died. His tomb disappeared beneath the desert. Thousands of years passed. Civilizations rose. Civilizations disappeared. Empires came and went. And Tutankhamun's tomb remained hidden beneath the sand. Then, in 1922, Howard Carter found it. The doors opened. Gold emerged from the darkness. And within months, the world had transformed an archaeological discovery into a supernatural legend, a story of death, a story of revenge, a story of an ancient king protecting his final resting place. But perhaps there is something even more fascinating about the story. The curse itself may have been created by the modern world. Newspapers wanted a sensational story. The public wanted mystery. And Tutankhamun's tomb provided both: an ancient civilization, a forgotten king, a mysterious death, and a treasure chamber filled with gold. It was the perfect ingredients for a legend. But there was still one final question. If there was no supernatural curse, why does the story continue to fascinate us more than a century later? So, was there really a curse? Perhaps not. There is no convincing evidence that an ancient supernatural force killed the people who entered Tutankhamun's tomb. Lord Carnarvon had a medical explanation for his death. Howard Carter survived for many years after opening the tomb, and the supposed curse was never found written inside the tomb itself. But maybe that is what makes the story even more fascinating, because the real mystery isn't whether Tutankhamun could kill people from beyond the grave. The real mystery is how a teenage king, who was almost erased from history, became one of the most famous people of the ancient world. His tomb survived, his treasures survived, his golden mask survived, and his name survived. After more than 3,000 years, we are still talking about him. The tomb was opened in 1922. The curse was born afterward, but the legend has never been buried. Please subscribe my channel for more epic stories.